When Pastor Jamal Bryant finally opened his mouth about Bishop Marvin Sapp, you won't believe what came next. What was supposed to be a moment of brotherly respect quickly turned into something no one expected. The church world, usually filled with praise and positivity, suddenly found itself holding its breath. Let me tell you, this wasn't some small talk between two pastors. It was a moment that peeled back a layer no one was ready to see. Behind the perfect image, the hit songs, and the spotless sermons, Jamal hinted at something deeper, something that made everyone question how well they really knew Bishop Marvin Sapp. In the gospel world, few names carried as much power as Marvin Sapp. He was not just a singer, he was a story of faith and survival. The man who gave us Never Would Have Made It had become a voice of comfort for millions. His songs touched broken hearts, and his journey inspired those who thought they couldn't stand again. But here's the shocking part. According to Pastor Jamal Bryant, the picture people saw of Sapp was only half the truth. There was another side, one that hid behind the bright lights and the calm sermons. Jamal said things that made people sit up, replay his words, and wonder if they had missed something all these years. You see, Jamal Bryant and Marvin Sapp weren't strangers. They walked in the same world of faith, fame, and influence. They knew how heavy it could be to stand in front of thousands every week and still feel the pressure to be perfect. But this is where it gets interesting. These weren't just two men of God. They were two men who understood the power of reputation and how quickly truth can shake it. Jamal Bryant's words didn't come from anger. They came from a mix of shock and reflection. He didn't call Marvin Sapp a villain. Instead, he described him as a man who carried his public strength like armor while hiding battles that almost no one could see. What makes this story different is how Jamal spoke. He didn't shout or accuse. His tone was calm, almost heavy with emotion, like someone who had seen too much and couldn't stay silent anymore. He talked about moments that made him question what success in ministry really looked like. He said that sometimes the people we celebrate for their faith are the ones who fight the hardest in silence. The craziest part was that he didn't drop names or reveal secrets. He just spoke with a truth that made people uncomfortable because it sounded too real. It made you wonder what kind of pain could exist behind such a steady smile. As his words spread online, the gospel world started buzzing. Everyone wanted to know what Jamal Bryant had seen, what he meant, and why he had decided to speak now. Destiny took an unexpected turn when his comments hit social media because the conversation shifted from music to mystery. Some people praised him, saying it was time someone talked about the pressure behind the pulpit. Others said he went too far and should have kept quiet out of respect. But no matter which side people stood on, no one could look away. It felt like something big was unfolding, something that had been building for years, hidden behind polished sermons and award-winning songs. By this point, people started digging into every word Jamal had said, trying to find clues. Was he pointing to something personal? Was there a secret? Or was he simply showing the truth that even men of God can break under the weight of their calling? Let me tell you, it wasn't gossip anymore. It was revelation. A revelation about how fame and faith can sometimes clash, creating a life that looks perfect but feels heavy behind closed doors. And that's where Jamal Bryant left everyone hanging, not with judgment, but with a sense that something deeper was still untold. After Jamal Bryant's words hit the public, things began to shift fast. The gospel world wasn't used to hearing one respected pastor speak so openly about another. You won't believe how quickly people started to connect the dots, pulling old interviews, sermons, and even pictures, trying to understand what was really going on. Let me tell you, it wasn't just curiosity. It was confusion mixed with disbelief. Nobody expected Jamal to speak like that about Bishop Marvin Sapp, a man known for his calm spirit and unshakable faith. But here's the shocking part. Bryant never mentioned anything scandalous. He only revealed enough to make everyone wonder what kind of truth was sitting quietly behind the music and ministry. This is where it gets interesting. Years before this conversation ever happened, both Jamal Bryant and Marvin Sapp were seen as symbols of modern faith, two men leading new generations into the church with style, energy, and influence. They weren't the old kind of preachers who just stood behind pulpits. They were voices that blended faith with fame. Together, they represented a new wave of gospel leadership. But what many didn't realize was how their paths crossed in quiet ways long before the cameras ever caught them together. They met at conferences, shared stages, and sometimes shared private talks about the challenges of leadership. Those conversations, according to Jamal, were the beginning of his realization that Bishop Sapp wasn't as predictable as people thought. Bryant once described how he first noticed something unusual about Marvin. During a leadership roundtable years ago, he said Sapp sat quietly through most of it, barely speaking. But when he finally did, every word carried weight, as if he had already thought 10 steps ahead. Jamal said that moment stayed with him. He saw something powerful in Marvin's silence, something both brilliant and unsettling. To him, Marvin wasn't just a preacher or a singer. He was a strategist. He calculated, he planned, and he always seemed to know how to make the right move at the right time. The craziest part, that calm, humble tone everyone loved, was the same thing that gave him incredible control. Over time, Jamal's respect for Marvin grew, but so did his curiosity. He began to notice patterns, the way Marvin handled church politics, how he managed influence, how his presence alone could shift an entire room. What makes this story different is that Jamal didn't see anything evil in it. Instead, he saw power, raw, deliberate power wrapped in gentleness. And yet, there was something almost too perfect about it. He wondered what it cost Marvin to keep that balance, to stay strong and composed while everyone else looked up to him. Destiny took an unexpected turn when Jamal started realizing that what looked like perfection was actually pressure. Behind the flawless performances and strong sermons was a man constantly managing expectations, his own and everyone else's. Jamal saw how Marvin carried his role like a burden made of gold. He had influence, yes, but he also had weight on his shoulders that few could understand. Let me tell you, Jamal once said it wasn't Marvin's flaws that shocked him. It was his discipline. He lived with such control that it was almost scary. Every decision, every statement, every move, intentional. And Jamal believed that kind of life could only come from someone who had seen and survived more than the world would ever know. But here's where it gets even more twisting. Jamal began to see moments that didn't match the public image. He watched how Marvin dealt with people in private, firm, calm, but sometimes colder than expected. He wasn't rude, just distant, like someone who had built walls too high for anyone to climb. It wasn't arrogance, it was protection. Jamal said it made him wonder if Marvin's greatest strength was also his greatest loneliness. The gospel industry only saw the glory, but Jamal saw the grind, the long nights, the tough choices, the invisible sacrifices that made the man behind the music. By the time Jamal spoke publicly, these thoughts had been sitting with him for years. He wasn't revealing a scandal. He was revealing a human story, one that the gospel world wasn't ready to face. Because when a man like Bishop Marvin Sapp, known for his faith and peace, becomes the subject of such deep reflection, it forces everyone to question how much of what we see is real and how much is just survival. As Jamal Bryant continued to reflect on Marvin Sapp, he began to realize that the man's public image barely scratched the surface of who he really was. Let me tell you, what he saw behind the scenes was both impressive and unsettling. Marvin wasn't just a singer or pastor. He was a thinker, a planner, a man who seemed to have everything under control, even when the world thought he was just performing or preaching. What makes this story different is that Jamal didn't just notice Marvin's talent. He noticed the way Marvin carried himself, the way he made decisions, the way he influenced people quietly without anyone realizing it. And the craziest part, even those closest to him were sometimes surprised by his choices. Jamal described a moment that stayed with him for years. During a private meeting with other gospel leaders, a disagreement had started between two very influential pastors. On the surface, Marvin seemed calm, almost indifferent. But Jamal noticed how he listened, weighed the words carefully, and then spoke in a way that resolved the tension without anyone even realizing what had happened. It wasn't magic, it was strategy. It was power wrapped in patience, intelligence, and prayer. This, Jamal said, was a side of Marvin Sapp the public never saw, the side that calculated moves and guided outcomes behind the curtain while smiling on stage. But here's the shocking part. For all that intelligence and control, Marvin was still human. Jamal saw moments of vulnerability that made him pause. He saw the sacrifices, the long nights of doubt, the hidden struggles that shaped decisions no one else noticed. Sometimes Marvin seemed to carry a weight so heavy that it was almost visible. Jamal said, "You see a man leading thousands, but you don't see the cost he pays for every decision he makes." Destiny took an unexpected turn in Jamal's understanding when he realized that Marvin's strength wasn't just in his voice or leadership, it was in how he survived pressures that would have broken most men. As their paths continued to cross, Jamal began noticing patterns in Marvin's character. He saw how carefully Marvin managed respect, never demanding it, never showing off, yet always commanding it. He watched how Marvin balanced influence with humility, strategy with faith, and while the world saw an anointed preacher, Jamal saw someone who constantly calculated the consequences of every move, someone who understood that every choice could ripple far beyond what anyone could imagine. And the craziest part, that precision, that control, sometimes made Marvin seem untouchable, almost unreachable. It made Jamal both admire him and feel uneasy, because such power, even in a man of God, could be intense, even frightening. But what made Jamal finally speak out wasn't Marvin's control or intelligence. It was the human side of him that nobody talked about. He remembered moments when Marvin's calm exterior faltered for a second, when the private pressure of leadership showed in small ways. It was in these moments that Jamal realized the public image of perfection was only a fraction of the story. He understood that behind the music, the awards, and the sermons, there was a man constantly balancing faith, influence, and personal struggle. Let me tell you, Jamal didn't expose scandal. He exposed complexity, the hidden weight of greatness that most fans would never imagine. By the end of this reflection, Jamal knew something few others did. Bishop Marvin Sapp wasn't just a singer, a preacher, or a public figure. He was a multi-dimensional man, brilliant, strategic, disciplined, and human all at once. And what Jamal wanted the world to understand was that these layers made Marvin extraordinary, but also deeply complex. Every decision carried consequences, every word carried influence, and every choice shaped not just his life, but the lives of countless people around him. And when Jamal finally spoke, it was this balance between admiration, shock, and revelation that made the gospel world stop and listen. As Jamal Bryant's words spread, the reaction was immediate and intense. Social media exploded with speculation. Fans, ministers, and gospel enthusiasts all tried to make sense of what he had said. Let me tell you, some people were praising him for honesty, saying it was long overdue for someone to talk about the unseen pressures and complexities of leadership in the church. Others accused him of going too far, claiming that no one should speak so openly about someone they respect. But here's the shocking part. Jamal hadn't attacked Marvin Sapp at all. He had simply revealed a truth that made everyone stop and think. Even the most anointed, the most celebrated, the most seemingly perfect people carry weight that the public never sees. Bryant emphasized the human side of greatness. He explained that Marvin's calm, composed persona, his powerful voice, and his leadership were only a fraction of who he really was. Behind it all, he carried decisions, sacrifices, and moments of pressure that shaped him in ways most people couldn't understand. This is where it gets interesting. Fans who had followed Marvin for decades suddenly saw his music, his sermons, and his ministry through a new lens. Every song, every speech, every performance seemed to carry more depth once you realized the man behind them wasn't just talented. He was navigating life with careful, deliberate choices every single day. And the craziest part? Marvin's response, or rather his silence, spoke louder than any words could. Unlike many public figures, he didn't feel the need to defend himself, to deny, or to post statements online. Instead, he continued his ministry, his music, and his life as usual. His calm grace in the face of sudden scrutiny became a statement of its own. It showed humility, focus, and faith, proving that sometimes silence is more powerful than 100 explanations. Destiny took an unexpected turn here because the silence forced people to reflect, to wonder, and to see Marvin Sapp as someone far more layered than the public image had ever shown. As discussions continued, Jamal's revelation became more than just a story about two pastors. It became a lesson for everyone who admired leaders, celebrities, or people in positions of influence. Let me tell you, it made people ask, how often do we mistake public appearances for reality? How often do we fail to see the human struggles behind success? Jamal had opened a window, just enough to glimpse the weight of influence, the cost of leadership, and the complexity of a man who had dedicated his life to faith, music, and guiding others. By the time the conversation settled, one thing was clear. Bishop Marvin Sapp was no longer just a voice on stage. He was a multidimensional figure whose intelligence, discipline, strategy, and humanity created a legacy that could inspire, unsettle, and amaze all at once. Jamal Bryant's words reminded everyone that the story behind greatness is rarely simple, and the most powerful revelation of all, that sometimes the people we think we know best have depths we may never fully understand, and yet their faith, perseverance, and choices continue to shape the world in ways that leave us in awe. This is how the gospel world learned to see Marvin Sapp differently, not as a perfect icon, but as a man, complex and extraordinary, whose story challenges us to look beyond the surface.